Hi everyone, happy Monday. What's today? April 6th, I think. I'm losing track of all these days. Um, so ready to kick off the week. I hope we're starting strong. We only have 4 days this week. So if you're getting tired or ready to just take it easy, Friday will be your day. Just enjoy. Not have to log in, not have to do work, that kind of stuff. So got some stories for you today. Before we do, I just want to do like another little activity. So last time, I don't remember when it was, last week, we did one about the folding hands. So today I want you to grab your hand that you write with. If you write with both, you're very cool. Or just choose one that is best for you. So just grab your hands, take a look at it, okay? Take a very close look at your hand, front, back. And I just want you to see if you can find 3 things about your hand that you've never noticed before, okay? So, no, for me, it looks like I have a little scar of some sort there. I don't know what that's from. My hand looks kind of purpley in the middle. I don't really pay attention to that very much. I have a bunch of freckles here that I've never really paid attention to either. So take a good look at your thumbprint, your fingerprints. So hopefully you found something that was like, oh, I never noticed that before. That's kind of, weird. And just think about, so if you're like been in your house for a long time, you're doing the same stuff every day, or in your, living room, kitchen, yard, and it's just like getting old and redundant and you're getting tired of it. Your hand has been with you for 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 years, and maybe there's some things you never even noticed about your own hand before. So your hand has been with you this whole time, and there's still some new things to discover. So this is just an activity about like perspective. So like really kind of think about your surroundings today, and maybe you can find something that is like different than something that you feel like you haven't noticed before. So really see like if there's a way you can just like shake things up a little bit, see things differently, sit somewhere different, sit on the floor, sit in a different corner of the room, stand up more. For me, I've been trying to use like a standing desk rather than a sitting desk. So even though we're kind of trapped inside, hopefully you can shift your perspective a little bit to make things like fresh and still keep going. All right, so I'm going to start off with a story. This one is called Father Wakes Up the Village by Clarence Day. Okay. One of the most disgraceful features of life in the country, Father often declared, is the general inefficiency and slackness of small village tradesmen. He said he had originally supposed that such men were interested in business and that was why they opened their shops and sunk capital into them, but no, they never used them for anything but gossip and sleep. They took no interest in civilized ways. He hadn't heard of them, probably. He said, that of course, if he were camping out on the veldt or the tundra, he would expect few conveniences in the neighborhood and would do his best to forego them. But why should he be confronted with the wilds 20 miles from New York? Feels like he's out on the tundra, this village outside of New York City. Usually when Father talked this way, he was thinking of ice. He strongly objected to spending even one day of his life without a cold glass of water beside his plate at every meal. There was never any difficulty about this in our home in the city. A great silver ice water pitcher stood by the sideboard all day, and when Father was home, its outer surface was frosted with cold. When he had gone to the office, the ice was allowed to melt sometimes, and the water got warmish, but never in the evening or on Sundays when Father might want some. He said he liked water. He told us it was one of nature's best gifts. But he said that like all her gifts, it was unfit for human consumption unless it was served in a suitable manner. And the only right way to serve water was icy cold. It was still more important that each kind of wine should be served at whatever the right temperature was for it, and kept it too. No civilized man would take dinner without wine, Father said, and no man who knew the first thing about it would keep his wine in hot cellars. Mother thought this was a mere whim of Father's. She said he was fussy. But how people lived in an apartment, but how about people who lived in apartments, she asked him, who don't have cellars? Father replied that civilized persons don't live in apartments. One of the first summers that Father ever spent in the country, he rented a furnished house in Irvington on the Hudson, not too far from New York. It had a garden, a stable, and 1 or 2 acres of woods, and Father arranged the camp out there with many misgivings. He took a train for New York every morning about 8 to 10 after breakfast, and he got back between 5 and 6, bringing anything special he might need along with him, such as a basket of peaches from the city or a fresh package of his own private coffee. Things went well until one day in August, the Iceman didn't come. It was hot, he and his horses were tired, and he hated to come to us anyhow because the house we rented was perched up on top of a hill. He said afterward that on this particular day, he had not liked the idea of making his horse drag the big ice wagon up that sharp and steep road to sell 50 cents worth of ice. Besides, all the ice was gone anyhow. The heat had melted it on him. He had 4 or 5 other good reasons, so he didn't come. Father was in town. The rest of us waited in astonishment, wondering what would be the matter. We were so used to the regularity and the punctilio of life in the city that it seemed unbelievable that the Iceman would fail to appear. We discussed it at lunch. Mother said that the minute he arrived, she would have to give him a talking to. After lunch had been over an hour and he still didn't come, she got so worried about what Father would say that she decided to send to the village. So the mom's at home, like, wondering what's going on, why the ice isn't there. There was no telephone, of course. There were no motors. She would have liked to spare the horse if she could, for he had been working hard that week. But as this was a crisis, she sent for Morgan the coachman and told him to bring up the dog cart. The big English dog cart arrived. 2 of us boys and the coachman drove off. The sun beat down on our heads. Where the heavy harness was rubbing on Brownie's coat, he broke out into a thick, whitish lather. Morgan was sullen. When we boys were along, we couldn't take off his stiff black hat or unbutton the thick padded coat. Worse still, from his point of view, he couldn't stop at the bar for a drink. That was why Mother had sent us along with him. Of course, he knew it. They were watching after the coachman. We arrived at the little town after a while, and I went into the ice and coal office. A wiry-looking old clerk was dozing in the corner, his chair tilted back and his chin rested on his dingy front shirt. I woke this clerk up. I told him about the crisis at our house. He listened unwillingly. And when I had finished, he said it was a very hot day. I waited. He spat. He said he didn't see what he could do because the ice house was locked. I explained earnestly that this was the Day family and that something must be done right away. He hunted around his desk a few minutes, found his chewing tobacco, and said, "Well, Sonny, I'll see what I can do about it." I thanked him very much, as that seemed to me to settle the matter. I went back to the dog cart. Brownie's check rein had been unhooked, and he stood with his head hanging down. He looked sloppy. It wouldn't have been so bad with a buggy, but a slumpy horse in a dog cart can look pretty awful. Also, Morgan was gone. He reappeared soon, coming out of the side door down the street, buttoning up his coat with his hat tilted back. He looked worse than the horse. We checked up the weary animal's head again and drove slowly home. A hot little breeze in our rear moved our dust along with us. At the foot of the hill, we boys got out to spare Brownie our extra weight. We unhooked his check rein again. He dragged the heavy cart up. Mother was sitting out on the piazza. I said the ice would come soon now. We waited. It was a long afternoon. At 5 o'clock, Brownie was hitched up again. The coachman and I drove back to the village. We had to meet Father's train. We also had to break the bad news to him that he'd have no ice for dinner, and that there didn't seem to be any way to chill his Rhine wine. The village was as sleepy as ever, but when Father arrived and learned what the situation was, he said that it would have to wake up. He told me that they had had a long, trying day at the office. The city was hotter than the desert of Sahara, and he was completely worn out, but that if any Iceman imagined for a moment that he could behave in that manner, he, Father, would take his darn head off. He strode into the coal and ice office. When he came out, he had the clerk with him, and the clerk had put on his hat and was vainly trying to calm Father down. He was promising that he himself would come to the ice wagon if the driver had left and deliver all the ice we could use, and he'd be there inside an hour. Father said, inside of an hour, be hanged. You'll have to come quicker than that. The clerk got rebellious. He pointed out that he'd have to go to the stables and hitch up the horses himself, and then get someone to help him hoist the block of ice out of the ice house. He said it was almost time for supper and that he wasn't used to such work. He was only doing this as a favor to Father. He was just being neighborly. Father said he'd have to be neighborly in a hurry because he couldn't stand it, and he didn't know what the devil the ice company meant by such actions. The clerk said it wasn't his fault, was it? It was the driver's. This was poor tactics, of course, because it wound Father up again. He wasn't interested in whose fault it was. He said it was everybody's. What he wanted was ice and plenty of it. He wanted it in time for dinner. A small crowd, which had collected by this time, listening admiringly as Father shook his finger at the clerk and said he dined at 6:30. The clerk went loping off toward the stable to hitch up the big horses. Father waited till he'd turned the corner. Followed by the crowd, Father marched to the butcher. Nearly after a quarter of an hour, the butcher and his assistant came out, unwillingly carrying what seemed to be a coffin wrapped in a black mackintosh. It was a huge cake of ice. Father got it in front, sat on the box beside me, and took up the reins. We drove off. The coachman was in the rear seat, sitting back to back with us, keeping the ice from sliding out with the calves of his legs. Father went a few doors up the street to a little house furnishing shop and got out again. I went to the shop this time with him. I didn't want to miss any further scenes of his performance. Father began proceeding by demanding to see all of the man's ice boxes. There were only a few. Father selected the largest he had. Then, when the sale seemed arranged, and when the proprietor was smiling broadly with pleasure at his sudden windfall, Father said he was buying the refrigerator only on 2 conditions. The first was that it had to be delivered to his home before dinner. Yes, now, right away. The shopkeeper explained over and over that this was impossible, but that he'd have it up the next morning for sure. Father said no. He didn't want it the next morning. He'd have to have it at once. He added that he dined at 6:30 and that there was no time to waste. The shopkeeper gave in. The second condition, which was then put to him firmly, was staggering. Father announced that the icebox must be delivered to him full of ice. It's delivering a full refrigerator. Icebox is like a refrigerator. The man said he was not in the ice business. Father said, very well then, I don't want it. The man said obstinately that it was an excellent icebox. Father made a short speech. It was the one we had heard so often at home about the slackness of village tradesmen, and he put in such strong emotion and scorn into it that his voice rang through the shop. He closed it by saying, an icebox is of no use to a man without ice, and if you haven't the enterprise, the gumption, to sell your goods to a customer who wants them delivered in condition to use, you'd better shut up your shop and be done with it. Not in the ice business, eh? Well, you aren't in no business at all. And he strode out. The dealer came to the door just as Father was getting into the dog cart and yelled out anxiously, All right, Mr. Day, I'll get the refrigerator filled for you and I'll send it up right away. Father drove quickly home. The thunderstorm seemed to be brewing. A thunderstorm seemed to be brewing, and this had waked Brownie up, or else Father was putting some sort of his own energy supply into him. The good old boy probably needed it again as he climbed up the steep hill. I got out at the foot, and as I walked along behind it, I saw that Morgan was looking kind of desperate, trying to sit in the correct position with his arms folded while he held the ice with his legs. The big cake was continually slipping and sliding around under the seat, doing its best to plunge out. It bumped against his calves all the way home. They must have been good and cold. When the dog cart drew up to the door, Father remained seated a moment while Morgan, the waitress, and I pulled and pushed at the ice. The Macintosh had come off by this time. We dumped it out in the grass. A little later, after Morgan had unharnessed and hurriedly rubbed down the horse, he ran back to help us boys break up the cake, push the chunks around to the back door, and cram them into the icebox while Father was dressing for dinner. Mother had calmed down by this time. The Rhine wine was cooling. "Don't get it too cold," Father called. Then the Iceman arrived. The old clerk was with him, like a warden in charge of a prisoner. Mother stepped out to meet them and at once gave the Iceman a scolding that she had been waiting for him all day. The clerk asked how much ice we wanted. Mother said we didn't want any now. Mr. Day had brought some, and we have no more room in the icebox. The Iceman looked at the clerk, and the clerk tried to speak, but no words came out. Father put his head out the window. "Take 100 pounds, Vinny," he said. "There's another box coming." A 100-pound block was brought into the house and heaved into the wash tub. The waitress put the Macintosh over it. The ice wagon left. Just as we all sat down to dinner, the new icebox arrived full. Mother was provoked. She said, "Really, Claire?" crossly. "Now what am I going to do with that piece that's waiting out in the wash tub?" Father chuckled. She told him he didn't know the first thing about keeping a house and went out to the laundry with the waitress to tackle the problem. The thunderstorm broke and crashed. We boys ran around, shutting the windows upstairs. Father's soul was at peace. He dined well with his coffee and cognac served to him on the piazza. The storm was all over by then. Father snuffed a deep breath of sweet-smelling air and choked his evening cigar. "Clarence," he said, "King Solomon had the right idea about these things. Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do," Solomon said, "do thy hardest." Mother called me inside. "Whose Macintosh is that?" she asked anxiously. "Katie's torn a hole in the back." I heard Father say contentedly in the piazza, "I like plenty of ice." The end. What do you guys think of that story? I think it's a little interesting. All he needed was ice for his dinner, for cold water, to chill his wine, I guess. But he went through all of these lengths and ended up buying so much ice that he did not even need it anymore. And put all of these people through all this extra work that was really unnecessary. So what do you guys think is the theme or the moral of this one? So I think it can kind of be about I don't know, for some people, when you have inconveniences and then it just gets you extra worked up than normal, you just maybe take it to the extreme, or even how one little thing can kind of ruin your day, or it can really affect other people. So maybe a little bit about some forgiveness or compassion, understanding could have been used, but he was not about any of that. So I don't know, just some interesting things to talk about, discuss. Yeah. So let's do some riddles. Okay, let's do some road crossing riddles, okay? Why did the dinosaur cross the road? Why did the dinosaur cross the road? Because in those days they didn't have chickens. Really? Do you think chickens lived with dinosaurs? Maybe, maybe not. What else? What would you get if you crossed the road with a bag of money? What would you get if you crossed the road with a bag of money? Mugged. Someone would steal it from you. All right, so we'll wrap up with another Dr. Quick Solve whodunit. Okay, this one is called The Ming's Things. As they walked around the house, Officer Longarm told Dr. Jail Quick Solve about the robbery. Mary Ming said she often forgets to lock her back door. She said her neighborhood had had very little crime for years, and Inky, her Cocker Spaniel, would at least bark at a stranger and scare him away. She went to bed late last night, though, and she woke up and found her 2 antique vases handed down from her husband's ancestors were missing. She said they were valuable and very important to her family. There is no signs of forced entry, and nothing else is missing. Dr. Quicksolve and Officer Longarm went into the kitchen where Marvin and Mary Ming sat sipping coffee. Their friend Jade Green was consoling Mary. No one is going to break anything so valuable, she said. The police will find. Find what? Said a petite red-haired woman who had just come in through the back door. I saw the police car. What happened? This lady's just walking into their house. Officer Longarm and Dr. Quicksolve looked questioningly at the new arrival. This is Diana, my neighbor, Mary Ming said, looking through the short hallway at the empty end of the mantel. Diana cried, "Look, your vase, oh no. Did you have a burglar?" she asked. Yes, Mary Ming replied sadly, we did. The police will take care of this, Jade Green said, continuing to console her friend. I'm sure they'll find them, Diana added, supporting Jade's confidence. You'll get them back. Don't worry, dear, Marvin Ming told his wife and put his hands on hers. Thank you for your confidence, Officer Longarm said. Were you green with envy or just greedy? Dr. Quicksolve asked. Who was Dr. Quicksolve talking to and why? So Dr. Quicksolve was already suspecting someone. Okay, so this lady did not often lock her back door. They had little crime, they had a dog. When she woke up, she saw the 2 vases were missing. They're from her husband's ancestors. No signs of forced entry, nothing else was missing. Jade Green was the friend that was there, consoling her. And then Diana's the one who came later and saw that a vase was gone on the mantle at the end of the hallway and told her she's sure they would find them. There's got to be something really subtle on this one. What could it be? The Ming's Things. Dr. Quicksolve was not talking to Jade Green, so not the first friend that was there. He's talking to Diana because she said, you will get them back, when she could have only known that 1 vase was missing by looking down the hallway at the empty end of the mantle. So they're saying that she should have only seen that 1 was missing, but then she told them that she knew there was more than 1 missing. So, not sure where that clue is in here exactly, but maybe you picked that up. I don't know. Maybe some of the phrasing was different. All right, guys. Have a good one. I'll see you tomorrow.